Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have to give you this morning some considerations on chemical reactions in LENR, and the most important word is probably end. So first of all, this is an international collaboration between France and Canada, and I have to thank my Canadian co-authors for their help in this presentation. As a summary, I'm going to talk about stupid things like hydrogen-oxygen explosions, self-heating of palladium cathodes. When you remove them, they heat up on their own. Come back to this experience made by Fleischmann and Pons, if you remember, with this 1 cubic centimeter cathode which turned into an explosion. And last, QEE. What is this? You will understand this at the end. Okay. So the objective of this presentation is to show what we should not forget: conventional chemistry. In some specific cases, I'm going to talk about 2 examples. First, hydrogen-oxygen explosions. In the literature, there are several papers that report violent events and explosions, and some authors even wonder if such explosions had not some kind of atomic origin. You see here a beautiful example. Ask Jean-Paul what it is, he will tell you. This was a Dewar cell, electrolysis cell, which exploded, fortunately, over the weekend. But what was surprising is that the volume of explosive gas was quite limited, 100 centimeters, cubic centimeters. So when you try to detonate such a small quantity of gas, you have a weak explosion. So this damage seemed very strange, because it was violent. So I tried to duplicate this kind of explosion, and you see an example here. You have a glass tube filled with oxygen and hydrogen. You ignite with a hot wire. You have the flame traveling up the tube, and the plug is ejected, and that's it. And the glass tube is not broken. I reused this glass tube a dozen of times, still the same tube. It was broken at the end because I dismounted the setup and it fell on the ground. Well, but not because of hydrogen-oxygen explosion. Indeed, when we talk about explosion, there are 2 things. It might be a deflagration or a detonation. And these are 2 different things. So deflagration, you have a subsonic flame and a modest pressurized. In a detonation, you have a supersonic flame and a very high pressure. So, and a detonation can be produced by a large ignition energy. You know, ask the military people how they do this. A transition from a deflagration into a detonation, you start with a deflagration in a tube, for example. The flame travels faster and faster and faster and faster, and all of a sudden it turns into a detonation. This is called a transition. Or by another phenomenon called shock wave amplification by coherent energy release. What is this? This is the rapid development of a detonation wave induced, for example, typically by a temperature gradient in the unburned gas volume. I have no time to explain this in detail, but I wanted to share this with you this morning. And the temperature gradient can be created by a jet of hot gas injected into this unburned gas volume. So to investigate that, I made such a setup. You see a glass tube on the right side, bottom up over a water bath. And inside this glass tube, you see a copper tube, a small copper tube, connecting to a Pritt chamber on the left. And in this Pritt chamber, you have the high voltage spark igniter. So, and around this glass tube, there is an additional PVC tube as a protection, you know, just in case, and you are going to see why. You see, for example, here 2 pictures. On the left, this is a deflagration I obtained with this setup, just a gentle deflagration. If you look carefully, you see that the top of this glass tube hit this plastic cover, and the plastic cover was tilted and fell on the ground, and the glass tube fell back intact on its base like a SpaceX rocket booster, you know. On the right, I got a detonation. You don't see the cover because it was up in the ceiling. And many glass pieces thrown away. This is completely different, you know. So it's very probable that this explosion that occurred at Jean-Paul Biberian's laboratory was due to such Swasser mechanisms because he was using a hollow electrode, and this hollow electrode was probably the source of this jet of hot gas that created the Swasser and then this explosion. So if you want more detail about this, there is a paper to be published in the next issue of the JCMNS. Second example, this is the self-heating of palladium cathode. When the palladium cathode is loaded with hydrogen and removed from the cell in the air, sometimes it heats up, you know, on its own, up to red hot temperature. Miles, for example, said the sample left on the bench turned a cherry head, and Jean-Paul Biberian had the same experience with the palladium ribbons if the surface was made reactive, you know, for example, after loading, deloading several times, you have a very reactive surface, then it can turn red when you put this cathode in the air. I discussed this morning with Ed Storm, who has the same experience, you know, especially he told me if this palladium is covered by a little bit of sulfur, then you are almost sure it will ignite. So, what could I do? I have no palladium to play with it, so I just wrote a simulation model to investigate this, numerical model. You assume, you give some assumption and you get some results. So this model takes into account the hydrogen diffusion to the surface. The surface is active, so every atom of hydrogen coming to the surface is immediately oxidized, and so the hydrogen concentration at the surface is 0, as an hypothesis. The heat of reaction is split into a heat conducted inside into the metal, convection loss, radiation loss. It's easy to calculate. And you have to take into account the influence of the temperature on the hydrogen diffusion coefficient. This is very important. The metal heat capacity, and also the hydride dissociation enthalpy. This is a picture explaining exactly what I said a few seconds ago. So what are the results? You see here two examples with, in red, the simulation made for cylindrical rod of palladium 5 mm in diameter, and in blue 10 mm in diameter. And you see on the axis the time in minutes, 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, and so on. So you see that it takes several minutes for this palladium rod to heat up. And the smaller the rod, the higher the temperature is, and the short time it takes to give up all the energy. If you have different initial loading ratios, it's interesting because the highest loading ratio gives a higher temperature and it lasts a shorter time. And if you have a small loading ratio, the maximum temperature is lower, but it lasts longer. The model can also calculate, it's easy for a computer, the average deuterium content in these, for example, here 5 mm diameter rods. And you see that for high loading ratio, 0.9, the outgassing is quite fast. After 5 minutes, you have almost no deuterium left in this piece of palladium. If you have only 0.5, it cools down before all the deuterium is gone, and you are left with some deuterium in it. If the surface is non-reactive, you just have an out degassing, assuming again that every atom of hydrogen coming to the surface is immediately transformed in a molecule that immediately leaves the surface. You know, in computer, you give the assumption you want, and it gives you a result, and this is the result. So the desorption is slow. It is probably even slower because all the hydrogen does not desorb that fast. Anyway. So the simulation shows that hydrogen or deuterium-loaded palladium can heat up if the surface is a catalytic surface. The maximum temperature can exceed 1000 degrees C and more. The peak is reached after several minutes, and this is important. You are going to understand why in a minute. The higher the loading ratio, the higher the peak temperature, and large pieces glow longer but at a lower temperature. And if the surface is non-reactive, the temperature remains low and the desorption is slow. Now I would like to come back to this Fleischmann-Pons explosion. In March 1985, a cell set up with a cathode made of 1 centimeter cube palladium exploded, you know, fortunately at night. The bench was destroyed, and a hole about 40 centimeters in diameter, 10 centimeters deep in the concrete floor was observed at the end. Could a combination of gas explosion and palladium self-heating explain this event? Well, what follows is a speculative scenario, just a speculative scenario. I don't say it's a truth, it's a proof, it's just a thing to think about, and we can discuss that in the following years, because this is not the end of the story. So, according to witnesses, this electrolysis cell was put on a bench made of hard material, you know, like something like that. And this experience lasted several months before the explosion, just to say that this palladium surface was probably highly reactive. For a reason you can ask to Jean-Paul, the cell exploded, you know, probably a Swasser again. And so you get a heap of glass pieces, you know, and a mess of different debris, and inside this palladium cathode, now in the air. And this palladium cathode starts to heat up, to further heat up to a very high temperature. And the bench underneath does not like this, most probably. So after several minutes, you get a hole and everything falls down on the floor. And it's still heating. So now you heat up this concrete floor. And the concrete does not like hot spots like that. So possibly you got a spalling of this concrete because of this heating. Is it possible to get such a spalling with a hot spot? Well, to have an idea, let's go to Atlanta. There is a nice place called Stone Mountain there. And you see here the largest bas-relief sculpture in the world, quite large. It represents Confederate Army with General Lee and so forth. Anyway, the interesting thing for us is that it was carved by oxide fuel burners. So you see here a sculptor carving this rock just with a flame burner, just to give an indication that with a flame you can cut rocks. So we should probably ask artists. We don't frequently speak to artists in our group, but we should do maybe in this case mastering oxyflame burner carving to know what he thinks about, and if it is possible in his view to make a pit in a concrete floor with just a burner. Maybe yes, I don't know. So just to say that maybe these strange events were not due to atomic reactions. And I consider this a good news because maybe LENR is not that dangerous. But don't forget that chemistry at times can be very dangerous. Last part of my speech, this is QEE. What is this? Well, what is the name of our science? Over the past year, we have used several names, cold fusion, lattice-assisted nuclear reactions, low-energy nuclear reactions, anomaly heat effect, and you are using the metal hydrogen energy. And this is quite interesting, this last two wording, because it does not contain the letter N like nuclear. Because the letter N has a detrimental impact on public acceptance. What is this machine? You know this machine? This is a magnetic resonance imaging machine. How was this machine called some years ago? They were called nuclear magnetic resonance imaging. And all the doctors realized that this letter N was detrimental. They dropped it. And this is the reason since 2007, these NMRI are now called MRI. So we should forget this letter N if you use a new name. And now comes the most important slide I ever produced. Listen. For me, nuclear reactions are not the root cause of the phenomena we observed. Why? Because nuclear reactions are the results of effects pertaining to the world of quantum mechanics, Okay. So let us name our science according to the general source of the phenomena, and I am proposing quantum effects energy. A new name would have some benefits, indeed. First, the letter N would be avoided. It breaks the wall of the four miracles problem, because you turn around this problem of four miracles. It describes accurately what is the focus of the theoretical studies we are doing all together, looking at, thinking at the presentations made these days about theory. You see on the screens many equations, wave functions and such things, and brackets, typical animals of the quantum world, zoo. So quantum mechanics is always behind this. And it gives ground facing mainstream science, because if a skeptic is shocked by the idea of cold fusion, tell him that Niels Bohr said, anyone not shocked by quantum mechanics has not yet understood it. Well, quantum effects energy. We need an acronym for this. And as you notice with my French accent, English is not my mother tongue. So I need your help to find out what would be the best acronym for that. QE, QEnergy, I don't know. So your proposals are now invited, And what do you gain with that? Indeed, the best find will be rewarded by immortality. No? So, I have my own proposal. QEN. Yes, Queen. Why not? So I hope the Queen of England will not be shocked by this word. So I finished with some French words, honni soit qui mal y pense. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We have about 5 minutes for discussion and comments. Anybody?
I would like to propose knighthood for Sir Jacques. And
I'm not professor.
I think we can vote here.
I'm a retired engineer, that's all. So.
Oh, okay. I retract my proposal.
Excuse me. There's an N in Queen.
In your simulations, when the deuterium comes out or hydrogen comes out, there's miscibility gap where the chemical potential is flat.
Yes.
And also the diffusion coefficient is down by close to 2 orders of magnitude in the miscibility gap. And so in your simulations, it's conceivable that that would be important to include. I think it would make a difference in your plots.
Okay, so I have to keep things simple. So indeed, the model takes into account the hydrogen diffusion coefficients change with the temperature, and just, the stupid activation energy. But you see also the dissociation enthalpy of the hydride. And this is different if you have a beta phase and only the alpha phase. When you have the beta phase, the first dissociation, it's typical with x equals 0.9, is exothermic. So it helps, obviously. After that, you dissociate the alpha phase, and this dissociation is endothermic. But of course, this negative enthalpy, or positive, depends how you consider the thing, is hidden by the reaction energy of oxidation. But it is taken into account. Now I didn't take into account this change of diffusion coefficient and dog because we try to find out this data, and at times you have to go to the computer and make the simulation with what you have at hand. But if you want to do more, we can share things on that.
I just want to offer a possible correction. Although it was about probably 18 years after the event, I talked to Martin about that, and he said that the depth of the concrete penetration was about the size of his fingernail. So, on the order of 1 to 2 centimeters. But that makes it even easier. But I also know that's almost 20 years later, and there's obviously been a number of discussions about that by him to others, and so the size has been changing over time, I suspect.
Thank you, Jean-Paul, for commenting.
I talked to Stan Pons about it a couple of years ago, that is 27 years after, or 30 years after the event. And I asked him, and he said the depths were about this. And
Show everybody, please.
the floor. He said like this and like this.
Is this like the fish that gets bigger?
Maybe you can. That's what I can tell you. That's another experience. So maybe the truth is in between. I don't know where.
It's also consistent with what Charles Baudet reported as a witness of that. He said the wall was 4 inches deep. So 4 inches, how much are 4 inches? I am metricated, so something like this. Okay.